Today's forum is going to be relatively straightforward. I'm just going to invite James and Rebecca to give you a short background as to why we're here, although I'm pretty sure most of us know why we're here, but to give you a background as to why the ASI and APESMA are involved in this forum today. We'll then ask Mr Ripper to give us a 15-minute outline as to what he thinks the state government can do to boost local content, and then ask the Minister to speak for 15 minutes outlining what he thinks the state government can do. We've then got about an hour, which we can throw open to the floor for questions, and I would encourage you to be forthcoming in questions. It's a good opportunity today to have a really rigorous discussion on policy. The TV cameras you see here, in case you're wondering, this is West TV, a local community television station. They're producing a special on today's forum for airing over the next week or two. So with that, I would ask James to come forward and give us a short outline as to why the ASI is involved in today's forum.
Thank you, Daniel. Thanks everyone for coming. Brief round of applause there. I'd like to say welcome to the MasterChef kitchen. We're going to see what the recipe is for our salvation and our futures. In debating this issue, we have to be very clear that we're dealing with the state government, and we have to stick to issues that the state government has control over. They can't devalue the dollar. They can't make the Chinese play fairly, but they can put pressure on mining leaseholders to do the right thing. They can insist on open and transparent reporting processes and approval processes. We hope that they can help businesses plan for the future, and we hope that they can make the approvals process transparent so that is achieved. Political will is extremely important to industry. We've seen the effect of political willpower exercised recently with the wonderful news that AGC picked up a large contract, and we've also seen, or we're in the process of seeing, the effect of political will with the Multony waste to energy project in Kwinana. If that one gets up, that'll be a major win for Phil Edmund, who has worked very hard on that project. Three key points for us to consider in the debate. We like to think that our local businesses offer best value rather than lowest cost. And we like to have the state government consider best value for WA as a whole, not just the mining and resource companies. We'd like to think in terms of full, fair and first consideration. We maybe think that the word reasonable in the policy documents is too open. So let's think about our people first. Measuring outcomes is very important to us. We'd like to see the construction phase separated from the operational phase in reporting. It's a simple thing, but it makes a heck of a difference to us. With regard to the language that's used, local content is a broad term. It can be used to describe everything from washing windows to design engineering. We have to be very careful that the language used is appropriate for what is actually being done. Balance is important to us in government policy. A lot of our competitors, a lot of the countries we compete with in the global market don't have the same standards that we apply to our businesses. They don't operate in the same way. They don't even think the same way about what is fair. So we need our government to be aware of that and to balance its activities accordingly. With regard to competitiveness, yes, we have to be competitive. All our businesses are competitive in their own market, but we need the government to be thinking of how their policy affects competitiveness. In the recent budget, we've seen that power prices will increase to small and medium firms by quite significant amounts. That's going to harm our competitive edge. We need the state government to be aware of that and to balance those policy initiatives to make sure that our companies are competitive and they're not getting in the way of our competitiveness. So with that, I'll leave you with some words from Rebecca about the engineering situation. Thank you.
Hi, and thank you all for coming along today, particularly the Minister for Commerce and the Leader of the Opposition. APESMA have been leading the push to have more skilled engineering work done here in WA. We've been working closely with the ASI and others to boost the level of work on major resource projects performed locally. Engineers are critical to WA and Australia's future. If we were to lose our skilled engineers, we would not have the capacity to innovate and build new industries, new solutions, future energy and community infrastructure. There is no job more critical to WA's development to become a smart state than that of an engineer. The only way we can continue to develop high-end engineering skills is to have local engineers working on higher level projects. A number of Australian engineers are working overseas at the moment on Australian resource projects, and this means they're developing the skills of professionals in other countries, while local engineers miss out on those training opportunities unless they themselves chase the work overseas. We need to ensure that we are fully utilising our existing engineering skills base and develop the next generation of engineers as part of the solution to Australia's engineering skills crisis. In addition, if we don't start designing major projects here, we will never have any hope of doing any of the fabrication work here. The link between where the design is done and the creation of local jobs is well established. APASMA congratulates the government for setting up the oil and gas engineering project to be conducted by Associate Professor Martin West on behalf of the Department of Commerce. I would encourage all engineers to participate in that survey questionnaire. APASMA have already done a lot of work to raise awareness of the issue of engineering design work being done offshore, as you'll see from the paper that's been put out in front of you. But there's still a lot of work to be done. We want to work with everyone, from government to the opposition to the engineering consultancies and engineers themselves, but we need support. I call on all WA engineers to get involved in the WA Jobs from WA Resources campaign to ensure that WA has the skills we need to maximise the economic and social benefits for our future. Thank you.
Thanks, Rebecca. Thanks, James. I now invite the Honourable Eric Ripper to give us a presentation as to how he thinks that state government should be acting. Thanks, Eric.
Thanks very much, Daniel. I'd like to acknowledge my parliamentary colleagues, Simon O'Brien and Peter Tinley, ladies and gentlemen. Thanks very much for the opportunity to speak to you about what is a growing problem, some might say a crisis, for our engineering, drafting, design and fabrication industries. Thank you for the opportunity to talk about Labor's plan. Much as our Premier denies it, we are in another resources boom. His own department's, or rather the Department of Mines and Petroleum website, shows $106 billion worth of projects committed to or already under construction, $115 billion planned and $77 billion possible. The size of our overall economy is just $184 billion, so you can see the impact that that level of investment is going to have. Even the federal leader of the Liberal Party, Tony Abbott, described WA as being in a boom, quote, the likes of which our country has never seen, and a modern day gold rush, and perhaps the most extraordinary expansion in Australia's history. Tony Abbott's words. I'm not usually given to quote him, but I will on this occasion. These are positive signs, of course, for the state. But as people in this room know, there is a dark side to this developing boom, and if it is not managed properly, we will be missing opportunities now and making problems for our future. Problems like the loss of skilled workers and the disappearance of design and fabrication businesses. Is the Barnett government managing this boom properly, or is the government reactive and developing policy on the run? We don't blame the government for the situation that has developed, but we do hold the government accountable for its resistance to change and its denial of the reality of what is happening in our two-speed economy. We blame the Premier for his refusal to acknowledge that there is even a boom, in contradiction to his own federal leader, and for the government's refusal to acknowledge what it can and should do right now. We do need to deliver the benefits of this boom fairly, and that means we need to ensure we have jobs in our local workshops and in our offices. Now, I've visited a number of businesses over the last month or so. Same story everywhere. Empty workshops, unemployed or underemployed workers, deep concern and anxiety about contracts going overseas. One example is Fiddy Steel, capacity to employ 80 people at the peak, have averaged about 50 employees, down to 20 when I got there. The week after I left, 2 more people were let go because of lack of work. The recent announcement of the contract work for AGC, which has just been discussed, was good news, and the Premier was on radio saying it would employ 50 extra people. But unfortunately, like a lot of his statements, this statement didn't reveal the true and full picture, because that company, according to its workers, has the capacity to employ around 800 people, and 2 years ago they employed around 400. Just before the Premier's announcement, the company was down to 150 employees. So I'm pleased that an extra 50 people will share in the benefits of the boom, but those 50 people will only get the company roster up to around half of what it was 2 years ago. Story for our engineering and design sector is just as concerning. The APESMA survey results last July detailed the concerns of their members about pay cuts or freezes, reduced working hours, and design work that could be done here but is being sent to Yokohama, London and Houston. The survey also showed work that was being managed in a Perth office, but the design work was being done in Kuala Lumpur, thereby forcing young engineers and designers to go overseas if they wish to pursue their chosen career. More recently, there is news that feed work for Browse is being sent to 2 different companies in Houston. This year, feed work for the Prelude LNG project was sent to Paris by Shell. Normally that's something that's only available to Health Department employees. A recent, very conservative estimate of the number of man-hours of design work available in the next 5 to 10 years is 20 million hours, with it possibly being as high as 30 million person hours. Now, that's a substantial prize and shows it's really worthwhile us campaigning on this issue. We don't blame the government for this situation arising. We do blame them for being asleep at the wheel and complacent about it, and for resisting the need for substantial action to deal with it. The government needs to recognise that there are 2 key changes that mean now is the right time to act on safeguarding skilled local jobs. Firstly, there is far more need to act. If we allow the situation to fall further, then the capacity that presently exists will disappear. The companies that are treading water at the moment will go under and disappear. The skilled workers will move away or go into different occupations or never get the skills because they'll never be trained, and the skills will be lost to Western Australia, possibly for a very long time, and in some future boom, people will say there simply isn't the capacity in Western Australia to handle this work. So there's a real need for action. Secondly, there's now far more capacity to act. In the past, quite frankly, as a state, we've usually felt that we've had to tread carefully to encourage investment in our resources industry. We've seen ourselves as being in a weaker bargaining position. Now the investment is rising with many, many projects in the pipeline. In September 2008, government figures said there were $90 billion worth of projects either committed or under consideration. Didn't include projects already underway. The latest summary on that slice of the picture shows $150 billion in projects committed to or under consideration. So between those 2 dates, we've had the global financial crisis, we've had huge debate on the federal mining tax, Now we've got debate on the carbon tax. All of those things could have been expected to have possibly deterred investment, but instead investment has ballooned. So we are in a stronger bargaining position, and my view is that demands for a reasonable amount of local content will not jeopardise investment given our stronger bargaining position as a state. The reality of commercial contracts is often that a large company will feel comfortable sending work to companies they've previously dealt with. So we need to create the conditions to apply pressure to use the expertise that is here so that those relationships develop and West Australian companies become the ones that the multinational developers feel comfortable working with. Labor has introduced into Parliament a skilled local jobs bill. That's a significant step towards protection, long-term protection of our design, engineering and fabrication industries, and it has the capacity to be extended to other areas of local content. Labor's bill does not mandate local content and does not contain quotas. Any attack on the bill on that basis is simply setting up a straw man that does not exist. The bill does not mandate, does not contain quotas. What it does do is provide a framework for certainty, transparency and openness. It forces the government to take responsibility and not stand idly by and watch work being sent overseas by companies who are making a very, very healthy profit from Western Australian resources. Here's what the bill does. It requires skilled local work provisions to be in all state agreements. Where a state agreement is not required, it requires that a skilled work agreement be tabled in Parliament so that everyone can scrutinise the agreement. It ensures skilled work agreements will include downstream processing and infrastructure, as well as electricity generation and transmission projects. The bill defines the types of skilled work to be covered by the agreements: engineering, design, drafting, fabrication. It defines the principles to be followed: long-term viability, expansion of our skilled workforce, economic diversity in the West Australian economy. What the bill does is provide a way of mobilising public pressure on multinational companies to use local expertise. So far, the government hasn't offered concrete solutions. They've not suggested or supported legislation. They've not come up with their own long-term plan. So far, what we've had is policy on the run, reacting to the public pressure and to the media attention. What we have from the government is phrases like encourage access to resource projects, engaging in strategic dialogue, empowering our own officers to provide assistance, to assist in providing connections, to renegotiate and reinvigorate the industry capability network, to act in partnership, government-led dialogue. I don't know what you think, but when I hear phrases like that, I think public service gobbledygook. I think jargon. I think speech which covers up lack of action. Those phrases don't give me confidence. So they're worthy sentiments, but they don't embody any concrete action. So we've got our bill before the Parliament. It's still being debated. I urge the government to look closely at it. I urge the government to acknowledge that it doesn't mandate, that it doesn't set quotas. What it does is provide a systematic framework for openness and public debate about local content issues. It's a big advance from where we are at the moment, where the government will not table, will not release the local content reports under State Agreement Acts, and will not release the government correspondence in response to those reports on the basis that there is commercial confidentiality involved. So, you can't see what the proponents are saying to the government, and you can't see what the government is saying to the proponents with regard to existing state agreement local content provisions. So I have that challenge for the government. I also have a challenge for Tony Abbott he challenged me, so I'm going to challenge him. I think that he has run a campaign across the country on local jobs, whereas Colin Barnett has said in Parliament that he'll not vote for our bill. So we all know that Tony Abbott is opposed to sending off jobs offshore. So I think it's time Mr Abbott got on the phone and told Mr Barnett to swallow natural, particularly in his case, government pride, to agree not to send WA jobs overseas and to vote for Labor's Skilled Local Jobs Bill. Thanks again for the opportunity to talk with you. I'll be delighted to answer any questions that you might have during the question period that follows the Minister's speech. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Eric. We now invite the Minister to come up and outline his vision.
Thanks very much.
Always wanted to see one of these work, so.
Don't hold your breath.
No, it might take a while.
Is there an engineer in the room? Well, thanks very much, Daniel. If I could also acknowledge parliamentary colleagues here in Eric and in Peter, to James and Rebecca, thanks for your opening remarks, but to ladies and gentlemen, friends all, thanks to the organisers of this forum for the opportunity to advance some discussions on a topic which is of interest to all Western Australians. I want to make it clear from the outset, this state government is fully aware of the local content issues, the industry participation issues that have led us all here today, and we're also aware of the recent years, the challenges to become more competitive in a more complex environment. The impact of changes being experienced in relation to offshore projects and some onshore, particularly iron ore developments, is challenging both industry and government, and it does need answers. It's also clear at this time that some steel fabricators and engineers and designers are not receiving the volume of contracts that they'd anticipated. How do I change that? Okay. I want to make it quite clear at the outset that this is something that I take very seriously as Minister. I took responsibility for local content as a portfolio responsibility only in January this year, and I fought to get it. I fought to get it because I understand how important it is. As a member for South Metropolitan Region, which includes all of the Kwinana Strip and sundry other industrial areas, I understand the challenges that are faced to various sectors of industry when economic circumstances change, and in this case, as economies and technologies change. I want to make a positive contribution to this, and I welcome the opportunity to be here with you all today to engage in what I hope after these presentations will be a two-way dialogue as we work together to find out the ways ahead for Western Australia to prosper in what is a new economic environment. Because we do have to acknowledge that market change is occurring, that it has occurred, that our previously high levels of natural protection that we've enjoyed are eroding. And that's because we're confronted with a number of new challenges brought about by changes in, well, modular construction technology, a strong Aussie dollar, the rise of other competitors in Asia, and a whole range of other factors that I'm sure that you've all considered and government has been discussing for some little time. Now, these are change factors. We've got to work out where we sit, where different firms have to work out where they sit in an increasingly globalised world, and no one can deny that these factors are long-term. There are implications for both government and for suppliers arising from the new situation that confronts us. And I acknowledge also that we are witnessing falling levels of local industry participation in some projects, whilst in other areas We're maintaining traditional levels and behaviour patterns in terms of contracting. We're even developing new industrial participation. Back in November, a little before my time in the portfolio, the state government announced that it would be reviewing its approach to the industry and to the whole issue of local industry participation. Just last week it was, in fact, I tabled in Parliament a situation report on local content produced by the Department of Commerce in conjunction with the Department of State Development, because while you hear a lot being said about communication, and I'm going to say a bit more about that in the course of my remarks this afternoon, it's also important to understand that we've got to have the data, the information available, which helps inform future policy development, which helps advise policy makers as to the real state of play, rather than just relying on the plentiful anecdotal evidence which is around, which, although necessary, is no substitute for solid research. So we'll be acting on the basis that local content as a market is now very multifaceted, and that there's different levels of engagement which will be needed in the future, different levels of engagement than those upon which we'd previously relied. Is that the... Yeah. So in my remarks today, I will touch on some things that Eric was referring to. In particular, what I'd like to see in this debate is an engagement by all parts of the sector and the community at large in finding agreed ways forward, and I'd like to see what some bipartisan approach on what used to be a non-partisan issue. Politics are politics, and we'll see what happens there. But this government does accept that we have a role, a leadership role to play, and that's been something that's been made clear to me from day one when I've sat down both individually and at larger meetings with our fabricators locally, and indeed with representatives, including those of the organisations that are here today. Just go forward. There are some success stories. Eric, you referred to the AGC contract on Monday, announced on Monday by Chevron down at the AMC, and you're right, it is good news, and you're also right, there's more needs to be done, and indeed it will be done. The most encouraging thing I took out of that announcement, because I was present on the day, was to hear some of the responses being given by very senior resource proponents, including the head of one of the biggest companies in the world, the local head of one of the biggest companies in the world, who was saying that it was important that this sort of contract came to Western Australian suppliers. It was important that they recognised the need to break down some of the large, too large contracts into more tenderable chunks, so that we could make sure that local contractors, suppliers, fabricators, engineers had the capacity to participate. Why? Because they understand that for all their corrective work, for their maintenance work, and sometimes some of the projects we're looking at projects that might not only be built once, but they'll be rebuilt almost, perhaps 3, 4, 5 times over the next 30 years. And it was encouraging to hear it articulated. We recognise, I won't try an accent, but we recognise that we need the skills here in Western Australia available to us for our projects to thrive, not only through their construction phases, but through their maintenance phases. We need to make sure that there are apprentices being trained here and skills being maintained. And the reason why I was encouraged to hear that said was because a couple of months ago, when I first sat down with those same type of major company representatives, the talk was about having responsibility to shareholders and boardrooms in Houston and London and Amsterdam, or wherever they might be. So that's a refreshing change. And the only thing that I can see that's happened that's caused that change. The pivotal thing that's happened has been the active engagement and leadership shown by this government from the Premier down to make sure that we get through to our, what will hopefully be our partners, the key resource proponents, to make sure that they understand what they need to do to ensure the goodwill not only of governments but of the community of Western Australia, which does support resource development, but they need to maintain that community support to make sure that they have future prospects. Now, you've seen this phrase before: to ensure local industry receives full, fair and reasonable opportunity to participate in major resource projects taking place throughout the state. This is a familiar phrase. It was a good point that James made about the word first, and that's something that I'll pick up on from that, James. I jotted it down. But full, fair and reasonable opportunity is what our industry needs, and it's what we can demand. And it's been that way for a long time under successive governments. This phrase is taken from the former government's local industry participation policy from 2004. And we haven't changed it. I'm not seeking to change it. It's the same policy that was in place when the Gorgon State Agreement, for example, was finalised. What I want to make sure is that we walk the walk as well as just talking the talk. And so in order to do that, your button obviously works better than mine. We need to, that's in this room anyway. We will focus on our close involvement by government, and that's what I'll pledge to you as the Minister for Commerce, a close involvement with strategic projects which have high levels of contestable content through the development and implementation of industry participation plans. And I know people don't particularly want to hear about dialogue and communication, but that is what it is all about as a state government, to get through in a way that only a state government can to all of the parties that are involved in the processes that we're talking about. And that does include our communication, our dialogue, if you like, with Canberra, to make sure that Australian industry participation plans are not signed off. And this is particularly relevant for offshore projects, such as our gas and oil projects, which are being ticked off by Commonwealth governments. We ought to make sure that they are bipartisan and that the Commonwealth government's attention also has regard for the views of the state government here in Western Australia, because that's a key way that a state government can assist industry by liaising with, in this case, another government, the Commonwealth government. We also consider it important to have an ongoing strategic dialogue with key project proponents on international business and procurement trends that affect Western Australia. And again, I come back to the need for our hard information in ensuring that we can develop shared vision between proponents and with government and with local industry about the competitive strengths and weaknesses of Western Australia's various supply industries, to make sure that there is more than room, but there is a high priority placed on involving Western Australian industry in significant projects. I am aware that some firms locally have already taken decisions to form joint ventures, for example, with overseas fabrication yards, or to switch from manufacture to operational support for projects. And this is something that I've discussed, I know certainly with ASI, if not with the PESMA, and it is a factor of the times that we see a number of our local contractors thriving because they've changed their business approach, they've shown adaptability, so that they're now either involved in a different stream of work, such as ongoing operational support and maintenance, or they've chosen to inject themselves further up the global supply chain. I don't know when we are going to start hearing complaints about local content, because of all the involvement of West Australian mining companies, for example, now dominating much of the scene in Western Africa. But this is the way that some of our firms are projecting themselves in the global marketplace, and it just demonstrates that there is success to be obtained, but that industry does need assistance from government in many cases to be able to enable that change. So there's a number of things that we are proposing to do, and there'll be an announcement made of a conspicuous nature about the things that we're already doing in large part now, though with not necessarily much fanfare, but I'm more than happy to share them with you. The Local Industry Participation Unit within the Department of Commerce will have an increased role in future, and I am working within government now to finalise the resources that are required for us to make sure that it will be so. And I acknowledge Steve Grocott and others here from the department today, because they'll be charged with ensuring that local industry does receive a full and a fair and a reasonable opportunity to supply contracts. And as such, it will work closely with the Industry Capability Network to negotiate and monitor the implementation of industry participation plans, to promote improved communication between proponents and suppliers, and also to consider other supplier performance issues, and most importantly, to advise government as to the state of play at all times, something that I think, in my initial assessment, has been seriously lacking in recent times. And it will act as a liaison point with the Commonwealth Government. I also acknowledge Linus O'Brien here, who's from ICN WA, in pointing out that to everyone here that we are active. ICN works under a contract funded mostly by state government, but also from some other sources, but working under a contract within the Chamber of Commerce and Industry in Western Australia. And I'll tell you that right now, at my request and with the agreement of the head of the CCI, there is a renegotiation occurring right now in terms of the breadth of that contract, because I want to wring some more value out of that contract, and to add to the excellent work that the Linus and his team are already producing, and we'll announce a bit more about that in due course. I'd like to conclude, though, with some remarks about the question of the Skilled Local Jobs Bill, and there may be some more, and I'll be brief about this, because if anyone wants to argue the toss, there'll be plenty of time to do that through questions. There may be other things that you wish to do to discuss in the free exchange that I hope will follow in just a minute. But it has been raised, it is an issue of the day, and so I turn my remarks now to the question of, do we legislate our way out of this? Do we create further bureaucracy to get our way out of this? And if so, do we go down the path of something like the Skilled Local Jobs Bill? I want to leave most of the matters for debate about the minutiae of that bill for the Parliament. I will touch on it briefly, but I'll leave most of that. Again, if anyone's got any questions about detail, well, we can go into it then. But I don't think you want to hear a lecture about what I think of the Skilled Local Jobs Bill. What I don't think, and what this government does not think, is that legislation is the answer to bind us up at a time of unprecedented and dynamic change, not only in our local economy and our marketplace and our industry sectors, but in the global supply chain that we have to inhabit. The problems that are manifesting themselves now are the challenges for our industry and all of those that support it to keep up to speed with all the changes that are happening, and to make sure that we preserve our rightful positions of preeminence at a place which is, James, as you point out, at the top of the queue. And I don't think legislation's the way you do it. Now, the problem with the Skilled Local Jobs Bill basically that it asks more questions than it's likely to answer. I don't know how any proponent is capable of agreeing with government years before a project commences construction, before any contracts, even presumably feasibility contracts, have been let, about how many man hours and how many tonnes of this or metres of that are going to be allocated to any particular, from any particular job to any particular local industry. I don't know how you can do that with any certainty. But let's say you could attend to that sort of detail. Let's wave the magic wand and pretend you could. I don't know what sort of outcome you're going to get when you're requiring a proponent to invest hundreds of millions, because that's the benchmark, or perhaps billions of dollars in Western Australia and guarantee a certain amount of local content, sight unseen, costing unseen, all the other preparatory work undone, and guarantee to that, so signing on the dotted line years before you start, and what's more, putting up a cash guarantee of I don't know how many millions or hundreds of millions of dollars to say we'll achieve this or we'll pay you this penalty as forfeiture. But I know two things about that. One, that is a race to the bottom. That is a race to achieve the lowest common denominator. What sort of commitment is any company looking to invest billions in Western Australia going to commit to on those terms years in advance? 25%? 28% local content? Because if not, if you don't achieve it, you forfeit it. Now, I don't want to see 28% or whatever the figure might be. I want 85, 90% local content. They're the sort of figures that we need to shoot for. So I'm not going to accept, and I would not expect as a minister with any responsibility for a future state agreement, to go to Parliament and argue in favour of some trifling amount of local content which undersells Western Australia. The other thing I've got an instant problem with, despite the circumstances of the day, is to agree to a bill that won't give us any benefit until years and years down the track. If we all agreed to it tomorrow and rushed it down to Government House to get the royal assent, and assuming it worked and assuming the details could be sorted out and assuming we had the capacity to do it, and assuming that the next time a Wheatstone comes along, we can work out that it's quite easy to get all these agreements in respect of 7,000 to 10,000 individual contracts under that major proposal. Assuming we could do all that, I would not go to the Parliament, and I certainly wouldn't go to ASI or OPESMA and say 28%, you're happy with that? I certainly would not do that. I think we can achieve more than that, and I think we are achieving more than that for those reasons. But in saying those things, and I'm sorry if it's a bucket of cold water on anybody, I say it because we're all fighting the same fight. The one thread that I have seen through any of the disagreement exhibited by anybody at this room or up the hill on the Parliament is that we're all in furious agreement that we want to see a better deal for local industry participation in this state. And so that's what we're working towards as a government, and we won't accept anything less. So I look forward to a bit of a conversation now, and this debate is going to go on. But I want you to know, Daniel, through you to everyone here, and Eric, through you to your colleagues as well, we want to see as a government a more energetic implementation of the policies that have sustained successive governments over the years, and I aim to make sure that you will get it from an agency that's resourced to do it, and hopefully with the active cooperation of those such as the people here today that have got such a strong, positive, vested interest in seeing we get there. Thanks.
Thank you, Minister. So we'll throw it open to questions now. So we've got about an hour for questions. Now I think there's a roving microphone. So we've got about an hour for questions. Now I think there's a roving microphone floating around. Just while we're waiting for that, I saw Simone McGurk come in. Simone's the Secretary of Unions WA, so thanks for coming, Simone.
I think it stands to, in everybody's interest, including the proponents and parties to those agreements, that those matters basically be made public. And that's something that I think needs to be done. There is a need for transparency. People here are asking, you know, are they getting a fair go? There's assertions from many quarters that they're not. So I want to get to the truth, and if we're not getting a fair go, then we've got a basis for making sure that we do correct the situation that applies. The other benefit of making these sort of information and undertakings public is that that's the sort of thing that does put pressure, real pressure, which proponents feel to make sure that they have appropriate regard for input by local participants. So, yeah, great idea.
Of course there has to be transparency. Transparency allows the public to express their view. The public is strongly in support of more vigorous action on local content. So transparency puts pressure on the proponents. It also puts pressure on the government. So, Simon, if you did happen to negotiate an agreement and came back and told the people of Western Australia you'd won 28% local content, you'd be killed in the subsequent public debate, at least politically. So you'd have a real incentive to negotiate an agreement that actually focused on the quality of the work rather than on a percentage, but a much better agreement than the one you've just portrayed. So, of course, there has to be transparency. Simon, I think you might have just changed government policy because Colin Burnett refuses to release the local content reports under the Gorgon State Agreement. So I hope you're able to prevail over the Minister for State Development in this debate.
Transparency, and I guess what we would like to see is not just one number in terms of local content, but broken down into contestable local content, and specifically around steel and engineering and design, so that those things that are always going to stay here, such as the legals and the dredging and the catering and those sort of things, are split out so that the things that are contestable, clearly, you know, we're here today around steel and around engineering and design. Because I can't for the like of me figure out, there's a report that's just been made available recently from the Department of Commerce. The CP Mining Sino Iron project is reporting 71% WA content and 13% Eastern States content, with a total of only 15% overseas content. That project had 100,000 tonnes of imported fabricated steel. All the engineering was done offshore. I think even the footpaths were brought in as precast concrete. So somebody's sort of playing games with numbers here, and I guess it's difficult from a government's point of view and the opposition if the reporting is one number that's aggregated and meaningless when it includes operational, when it includes all manner of non-contestable things. So I guess what we're saying there is yes, transparency, and yes, please make it a more meaningful split, so that we can measure the success of the push that's been happening here, and that we're encouraged to see happening.
And the holes that have to be dug in the ground that's only to be found in Western Australia. We are talking about the contestable work, and it's got to be more sophisticated than just a percentage, or more sophisticated than even a percentage. There is work which is strategic. If design work is done here, if Australian specifications are used, if Australian partners are used, then we're much more likely to get the flow-on work than if the design and engineering is done in some other place where international traditional partners are more likely to be used. So the government would have to negotiate a skilled work agreement which dealt with quality and nature of the work and looked at the contestable work, not just an agreement which came down to a figure. We're not focusing on figures, we're focusing on getting the best quality and best quantity of work that we can get. And I think there would have to be behind something like the skilled local jobs, the skilled local work agreements, there'd have to be a fairly sophisticated piece of government policy about the different demands that they're going to make on proponents and the optimum requests to make on behalf of the state. By the way, I also think there's scope for industry policy to work with the relevant WA industry sectors about what they might need. For example, previous governments of both sides invested heavily in the Australian Marine Complex at Henderson. So there's scope to consider infrastructure investments and other issues to do with the industry that would help the industry get more work.
Yeah, thanks, Don. You know, I agree with all that Eric's had to say. You're right about the figures. You know, what's the old saying about damn lies and statistics and all the rest of it? The fact of the matter is, we do have to have not only information and data, but stuff that can be analysed and interpreted correctly. And you know, Eric's right. I mean, when we're talking about, you know, the road being built out to the mine, well, obviously that's a local content. Do you include that in your figures to make them look good? I'd suggest that you need to break it down beyond that. Don, you also touched on the split out of contestable packages from mega packages. I think I alluded to that in passing in my opening remarks. If it gives you any comfort at all, I'm the former Transport Minister that looked at what was happening with main roads, for example, where they were been agglomerating for a whole range of good reasons. Road building packages, particularly road maintenance packages, into such big packages that not only did you have to be a national firm, you probably had to be a consortium of national bodies to actually bid for them. And in response to representations from road builders, and we're talking about here the $4 million type of road project, I'm the minister that convinced Main Roads that they needed to reserve a proportion of their annual budget to be parcelled out and made available to the local industry, or just made available so that local industry of that profile could participate, and that seemed to go very well and everyone was very happy with it. So it can be done, and again without prejudicing in that case the interests of the state taxpayer. But the point is, big resource proponents can do the same thing, and guess what? They've just worked out they can, and the AGC contract signed last Monday is a very good example of that. But the sort of ways that governments can actively participate and influence these outcomes. You know, you talk about the need to get everything here, and Eric referred to it about the need for all the processes to be done as early as possible here, whether it's your front-end engineering and design, because typically then a lot of things then flow from that in the directions that have been set by those that have been doing that early work. That's why it's good that governments, I think it's fair to say successive governments, have encouraged major proponents to headquarter here. You mentioned the AMC. You know, we're looking at a similar facility being prepared up in the north. So yeah, there are things governments can do, and in all of those things, local industry participation is vital.
Minister, can I just ask a follow-up question to Don's then? Can we expect to see in future local content reports provided to the Parliament a bit more of a breakdown rather than just one global number like 71% for Sino-Iron? Could we see breakdowns for engineering content, fabrication content and other sectors?
I would like to see that. You know, I understand, and everyone here understands about the sensitivity, commercial sensitivities of what sort of information is made available, who's paying for, you know, who's paying how many dollars per tonne for what, and all of that sort of thing. But the point is, I don't think there is anybody that's following this debate that's particularly wants to see detailed contracts that thick. No, they want the real information about what is coming to Western Australian participants and what isn't, and the nature of it. And that's the sort of thing that I'm alluding to when I talk about increasing the capacity of my department and contractors working for with my department to make sure that information is made available in future.
That's all, Coach. If I suggest then, not a supplement here, but a watchdog with teeth that would police the sort of numbers that are coming forward, because I just can't figure understand how Sino could come forward with figures like that, and for those to be digested in the government report without question, because clearly those numbers have been cooked.
I think that's the sort of thing that that does need to be examined, and I've no doubt that if we can bring forward those sort of reports into the public arena, that's a very important role for the Parliament. And it can be done in a positive way that we've seen our Parliament scrutinise other things in the past.
But this is the type of framework that we say should be the law of the state, requiring the negotiation of these agreements, requiring them to be open, requiring them to be detailed. And what's the sanction? Well, the chief sanction is the political punishment that the government gets and the reputational punishment that the proponents get if they haven't done the right thing by the state, out of which they're making so much profit.
I told you I fought to get this area of responsibility because I want to make a difference. I have no doubt that you and others here and outside, and Eric and others, will hold me to account over the months and years ahead for what sort of progress our policy achieves.
The question I have, and you've made mention of AGC's recent win of the $750 million contract. Don't have any details of that, but could you tell me how much of that $750 million will actually be spent here in WA, and how much of that $750 million will be coming in from overseas? If they're only looking at increasing numbers by 50, seems to me all they're going to be doing is increasing 50 expediters to account for what's coming in from overseas. I hope I'm wrong. Now that's the first part of the question. The second part is, if you don't have the answers to that, I might ask the question, are the people in government sufficiently savvy to be able to make these decisions or even ascertain what's going on? Because to me in the past, I don't think they have, otherwise we wouldn't even be having this forum.
Okay. I think it's directed to me, Daniel. Yeah, look, thanks, Emilio. The government, it wasn't a government announcement, though obviously we welcomed it. So government's not a party to it. It's between the contracting parties. My understanding, this is on the public record, it's a $50 million contract, I think, from memory. There may be some government and CCI officers here that might want to add something. It's $500 million. I think it's about 7,500 tonne of steel. It's basically for pipe spooling of various things. I don't know how many kilometres. I did have a big fact sheet. It guarantees, I think, up to a couple of hundred years. Not a couple of hundred, a couple of years work for the 150 workers, plus they'll take on another 50, plus there'll be apprentices thrown into the mix. So yeah, it is a good thing, and we'd like to see a hell of a lot more. And someone mentioned drop in the ocean the other day. Yeah, it's good, but at least it's the drops are going the right way. I understand. I think. And again, I'm not a party to it, but I understand that it's public knowledge that the materials, the steel, is being provided by the proponents, and I don't know where that's sourced from, but all the fabrication is happening locally. I don't know if anyone else, is there anything need, Linus? Right.
Yeah. Look, if I could just make a comment. You cast some doubt on the capacity of government and the public service backing the government to be right across the full complexity of the local content issue. I think we do need to seriously reinvigorate the government apparatus that deals with local content issues. We shouldn't forget that in the last resources boom, we got down to 2.7 or 2.8% unemployment, and the workshops were full. So perhaps it's understandable that there wasn't so much focus on local content as there needs to be now. I mean, we are in a different circumstance. Post the global financial crisis, there's much more competition for work from empty workshops in other parts of the world and from unemployed professionals in other parts of the world. And as I said in my speech, that creates a new set of circumstances which the government has to respond to. Do we have the capacity as a state to respond to that without jeopardising the investment? My view is there's such demand to invest in Western Australian commodity and resources projects that we do have the capacity to be more assertive on local content issues. And there are two answers to your scepticism about can the government really step up to the mark and do this. I don't mean government, political, Liberal or Labor. Can the government as an institution step up to the mark and do it? And answer one is yes, we need to reinvigorate the expertise in that section of the public sector. Answer two is if there's transparency and openness, then that's in itself a corrective.
Other questions?
Another question. There is a Barrow,
Just joking.
I think it was a Barrow Island Act, which basically says that the ultimate decision as to where the work is done, and again, correct me if I'm wrong, has to go through the ministry. Now, how does it all get through? Does the procedure break down? In other words, the work goes overseas and then the minister is notified, or does the minister sign off and say, yes, you can go overseas? What is the answer to that?
I'm not familiar with the Barrow Island Act. I think it's within the province of the Minister for State Development, not my portfolio. So unfortunately I don't know if the former Minister for State Development can shed any light on that.
Yes, there
Very
are.
good team here.
I don't know where I'm pleased to be assisting you or not. Look, let's just go to the facts and we'll leave politics out of it. The State Agreement Acts, which do contain local content provisions, are the responsibility of the Minister for State Development. That's his job. As with any ministerial responsibility, the public service does the work and then the minister either makes an assessment that the work is satisfactory or that it's not. Perhaps at an earlier stage in the process the minister might give strategic direction. This is the way I want you to approach this piece of work, and so on. So in the end you're quite right. A minister signs off. You know, the minister signs the letter back to the proponent saying that's okay, or the minister signs the letter back to the proponent saying that's completely unsatisfactory. You know, I want a new report, and I'm going to require that you report, if the agreement allows it, every 3 months instead of every year. So the thing about it though is I think we got complacent in the last boom. Workshops were full. All of this became a bit formulaic. And now we've got a new situation and we need a new response, and we need to have it open to public scrutiny, because I think if the public actually saw what the government was saying to the proponents and the very general nature of some of the proponents' reports, there'd be intense political pressure for a new system. Business that this is a classic occasion on which you might like to recognise the value of organised labour and what they can do to assist in this current campaign. Look, I accept your correction on whether the workshops were full in 2007 or not. I'm not trying to claim credit. I'm simply acknowledging that we have a different circumstance now. I can report at that time there wasn't anything like the intensity of debate that we've got now on local content. We've had local content debates for a quarter of a century in Western Australia, but this is the most intense that I can remember this debate. So clearly the signals from industry and from unions and from professional associations is that we've got something that's new and more serious, much more serious than we've had in the past.
You know, Eric makes some good points there. Yeah, I'll say hello to Simone as well. Nice to see you, Simone.
Will you also say that you value the role of organised labour? Come on.
As Minister was responsible for state labour relations and some of the difficult negotiations ongoing at the moment with the police and the fireys and others, you bet I do. And Eric's right. I mean, he points out, yeah, and Don, you said it yourself, you know, there have been other local content debates, there have been other peaks and troughs in how full the books are or how many employees are in and out of work. I remember when I first started in '97, you remember during the late 90s there was a downturn in our resources sector, and the fabrication industries down in Kwinana. I actually asked some of them, you know, a little bit like a sort of group represented by ASI, to go around and do some research amongst 53 of them there were at that time, so that I had some hard data to take to the then court government to help inform them of the problems we were having. But as Eric points out, the times have changed now. This is a different debate, and of course a lot of that's because of the globalisation of the economy, but also by the very nature of the size of the projects that we're looking at now. This is unprecedented territory we're now inhabiting. When you've got the likes of the Chevrons of the world and their West Australian operations are now prospectively bigger than everything else they've got put together. You know, we are in really uncharted territory, and we're seeing the dynamics of modularisation and looking elsewhere. And we discussed that earlier. But that's also a feature that we all need to understand, is that the playing field that we inhabit, and inhabit very successfully, has changed. The natural protections that we used to have, where you've got say a mining operation hundreds of kilometres inland in a very remote part of the state, is a different prospect perhaps for supplying the say the built infrastructure compared with an offshore place in Commonwealth waters, probably halfway to Timor or Singapore, than say a Mount Newman might be. And we all understand the different dynamics and that form of natural protection, and that's the sort of environment that we've now got to understand how to live and prosper in. It's also, I might just by way of finishing on that point, this is another reason why the state government has been so strong on trying to make sure that any operation, LNG, whatever it might be, at some point makes its way onto West Australian soil rather than not. Because that way the West Australian government can have a greater say in whether or not it gets approvals and in the sort of things that we're talking about. Whereas if it's stuck out in Commonwealth waters and we don't see it, and the Commonwealth are making all their participation plans without reference to us, it cuts us out of the game. And I don't think there's a lot of key decision makers on the eastern coast that fully understand Western Australia.
Keeping in mind with the track you're talking about offshore versus inland and what would have been easier done by Western Australia as opposed to overseas, it was interesting to note that a series of programs just before Christmas by Howard Sattler, and I'm not pretending that Howard Sattler's the guru of information, but he appeared to be having a countdown of the number of companies that were closing their doors prior to Christmas and the number of employees going to be made redundant as a result of work that would always have been done in Western Australia, maintenance work, going overseas as well. Do you want to comment on that?
Well, I think this is the subject of what we're talking about today, and people are aware of it. I remember listening to some of those Sattler programs, and that was one of the reasons, and my Chief of Staff, one of my advisors, they'll recall, that was one of the reasons why I said I want to have some more control over this. I want to get involved in this and have some portfolio responsibility. So, yeah, but you're quite right. Don't look at Howard as the guru of all reliable information, but he knows what he feels, and he feels it strongly. And if you agree with him, you're right when you're on the program, and if he disagrees with you, you're probably not. So furiously agree with him. The matter of our existing, and certainly we used to have a lot more natural protection by virtue of the fact that West Australia is a long way from most places, and we're already here, and that gave a built-in advantage to locals. And I think that's one reason why it's essential that maintenance be targeted by West Australian industry as a growth sector, as we have enormous new projects come on stream. It should be a real opportunity, and we should not see those opportunities going overseas. I was talking with Vince D'Amato from Frio Steel just on Monday down at Henderson, and they were, and they've been struggling for a bit despite their expansions. And the sort of things that they were targeting particularly was maintenance, particularly time-sensitive repairs and so on, as a very lucrative side to the industry. You also mentioned about new skilled workers coming through, and it was interesting, and this observation was made separately by Don Volti, the head of Woodside, Sam Walsh, independent, the head of Rio, Ian Ashby, the head of BHP, and Roy Krasinski, the head of Chevron, independently came back to a meeting that we had. It was actually at Fremantle Steel on another occasion, after the government had been engaging them for some time. We had a meeting with those people present, including a whole lot of steel fabricating principals as well. And one of the points that Don Volti made at this quite interesting and very productive meeting was that in going away and having a look at how their own companies source local content in their procurement programs, they also had a long hard look at the nature of the workforce that they were now employing and what levels of productivity they were getting. And one of the interesting things that was discovered was that the whole nature of their workforce and the profile of a skilled worker had changed and evolved. So that whereas before, if you had say a tradesman on the tools coming out of apprenticeship, gravitating towards a northwest mining operation, taking up residence in Tom Price or somewhere, it was a long scale operation. But now with fly in, fly out, we find that the typical pattern of a worker is they get off the tools, get on the tools as soon as they've finished their training in Perth, can't wait to get out, get amongst the big money. But then, perhaps in their 30s, when acquiring families and the need to get out of the fly in, fly out, they're getting out of that front line and coming back and doing other things, perhaps in a related industry back in Perth, perhaps in training or something different. And so what they were finding is that whereas in the 70s or 80s you might find that a supervising tradesman in charge of a team in a mine site might have 27 years experience, now they're finding that perhaps their supervising tradesman in a team might be 3 years out of finishing his apprenticeship, and they have noticed a decline in the relative efficiency and productivity of many of their trades teams, which they put down in part to that demographic factor. So it just shows you how we are in a very dynamic environment, and the things that we previously took for granted are changing, and we've got to work out how we accommodate it or do something else about it.
If I could comment, I think Western Australians for a long time have wanted a more diverse economy. Western Australians like the resources sector, recognise the prosperity it brings, but don't want us to have an economy entirely based on dig it up and ship it out. We want a more diverse economy. Now, a government has got to respond to that aspiration of Western Australians and plan really for two scenarios. It's quite possible that this could be a serious, sustained, long-term resources boom for a considerable period of time, which will require a lot of attention to labour supply, training, housing affordability, infrastructure, to mention just a few issues. It's also possible that there could be some catastrophe in the sovereign debt market in the European financial system, or some civil disturbance in China, which could bring this thing to a halt quickly. And so the government's also got to be prudent to bear in mind that that circumstance can arise. What you're pointing to is the erosion of our long-term capacity. If we lose firms now, firms go out of this industry, then how are we going to pick up the maintenance work as the resources sector grows? How are we going to pick up the new construction work when new projects come along? How are we going to build the sort of economy which can compete outside Western Australia for this type of work? I mean, we've talked about Perth being an oil and gas hub, by which we mean that we generate a critical mass of sophisticated expertise here, which we can then have as an export industry in its own right. I mean, how does London get to do engineering work for oil and gas? You might ask yourself, probably based, I guess, off some of the work that might have been done in the North Sea a long time ago. My own view is the Skilled Local Jobs Bill or something like it is only part of the answer. There's a piece of work to be done on all of the challenges facing the different energies, different industry sectors, and how we should apply cooperation between government, business and unions to surmount those challenges. And it might be, as I pointed out, investment in infrastructure, but it might be also other things. I don't know the answer, but I only know that getting the work is a necessary bulwark, otherwise everyone goes out backwards and we don't have an industry. But beyond that, we really want the industry to be sustained, successful, profitable, competitive. We might have to do other work as well, and that unfashionable area of government policy called industry policy, responsibility of the Minister for Commerce, might start to come into play.
About Minister, with respect, and perhaps I don't understand the point. I'm extremely concerned about the passion around objecting to the opposition's bill on the basis that we can't clearly define resources and works and people and costs early in a project. And just let me tell you where I'm coming from. So we're actually in a room of engineers and fabricators, and a project has a particular life. It moves from assess, select, define, execute and operate. So during the stages of that life, that could be a 7-year journey. It's not a 1-year journey. So the immediate stuff that you're talking about is actually occurring in the execute phase, which could be 5 years into the project. There's a number of us in this room who can, raise a hand or say their voice, that actually have a market segment and a market sector at both the select and define stages of a project. And the select stage is where they're choosing their options and doing bankable feasibility studies, and the define is where they're actually doing detailed front-end engineering development, they're deciding their procurement strategies, and they're preparing a case for a final investment decision for their relevant boards. So they'll go forward then with that defined case to the board will approve, and then they'll execute, which is when they appoint EPCMs and they do the work. My concern is that passionate objection to being able to define that early. You really can, really practicably, and the reason that we're struggling with the current framework is at that stage the procurement strategies are defined, and they're defined offshore. And at that very early stage, if we're not intervening and engaging in the process, and we don't have a rigorous, transparent process to do it, we'll end up with what we've got now, and allow me to exaggerate, but we'll end up with more doors closing on the Kwinana Strip. And if we're quiet in this room for a minute, we would hear another door close. Under the current policy framework we have, and the fact that we don't have early integration and the fact that we don't have a rigorous process, so I'm concerned that we, maybe I perhaps don't understand what you were saying, but you can very practically interfere, and that's where we actually need it. We need at the project approval stage with you senior guys, we need someone in the room saying, what about the social impact of this? Where are the local content benefits? That's where we need the rigorous, transparent process. If we think we're going to wait and put it into the execution stage, which is what we've done, and we've said full, fair and reasonable equals lowest cost producer, then we're going to replicate what we've got here, and we are accelerating the decline of this industry sector. There's my concern.
Paul, and that's why I put emphasis on the need for us to engage better than we have been at that early stage, and I referred to industry participation plans, and that's been a subject of the discourse. So, Paul, it's actually most of what you and I have been saying is something that we agree on. I understand the point that you make. My opposition to the bill that's before the Parliament is not about any opposition to the sentiments that have been expressed or about the valid and experienced points that you've been making. My objection to the bill before the House is that, one, it won't work. It just as a practical exercise, it will not work. That two, I fear it would be counterproductive. And that three, no matter how much we might want to embrace that flawed approach, you would still hear that door shutting today, because none of this could take effect until way down the track. It doesn't deal with the situation that we've got now. And years down the track, I don't want to have our industry and our community hamstrung by a legislative prescription from 2011, which ties their hands and forbids us the flexibility that we need to respond to a dynamic environment. Now, when I was coming up in the lift, it was that one they've been using as a services lift with the canvas things heading into it. So I made the observation, I was getting with a few people, hello, the padded lift. It's like the padded cell. And the bloke was Tibor, who's station manager of WTV, who I see you today, said, yeah, that's when we've had enough of listening to these politicians today we can butt our heads against. So I introduced myself, as you do. And he didn't retract it either. I could easily say, oh yeah, terrific idea folks, I hear you clapping and all of that. Let's work to mould this bill and see if we can, and we'll refer it to a committee and have an inquiry and all this sort of thing. Yeah, I'm all for it. I'm not saying that. I'm saying, I'm sitting here, I'm looking you in the eye, and even though it might not be what you want to hear, I'm saying my advice to you is that this is a piece of legislation, is flawed legislation that will deliver outcomes that are counter to what you want to achieve. That's why I'm opposed to it. Not because I'm in any way opposed. The reason why I'm leaning over is to look around with a bloke and the camera to address that chap. Paul, I respect what you've had to say. I understand and agree with what you've had to say. My only negative comments are just in response to you asking me why I don't support that current bill. But I agree, we do need to be, as a government, we can be more actively and productively and transparently involved by making sure that there is that involvement and that sort of undertaking as early in the piece as possible. Those are sentiments that were also expressed by Eric just now, that the earlier, and I also said the same in response to an earlier question, the earlier that we are involved, as you say, that's when we can set the ground rules and hold people to account. I just don't think a piece of legislation and some mandatory requirements set down in advance is the way to do it.
Look, I do think I need to defend the legislation. It's, you know, we already have pieces of legislation called State Agreement Acts, so it's not unusual to have legislation in this area. What people think is that the current State Agreement Acts are not rigorous enough and not rigorously enforced enough. Let's now come to the question about existing projects and projects for which approvals have already been given. Of course, we hope that this campaign will press the government into much more vigorous administration of the existing provisions. But to come to future projects, which is all really a bill like this can cover, you know, I had 8 budgets as the State Treasurer. I got educated in the requirements of successful economic management. I look at this bill and I see a bill which I'm worried about might be too moderate from your point of view, because, you know, it's a very sensible, common sense piece of legislation which says we're not going to have a standard ironclad concrete rule for every project, regardless of whether it's marginal, regardless of whether it needs sophisticated technology that isn't made here, or regardless of whether the workshops have already got a lot of load from some other projects that have just got underway immediately beforehand. We're going to have a separate boutique negotiation for each project based on the requirements of that project. It's going to be more rigorous and detailed than the existing state agreement provisions, because people are unhappy with the impact of those provisions. And the safeguard for all of it is it's going to be open, and you people and everyone else interested in Western Australia can have their say and can say the government did a good deal or didn't do a good deal, the proponents got away with murder, or there's a risk to the future of this project because the government's been too severe. People can say whatever they want, but I know we'll get a better result if it's open. And by the way, it has to be early in the project's life. That's when all the other approvals are being sought. That's when the government's got its bargaining power. And by the way, when you're building a $43 billion project, you just spend a bit of thought on how much steel is going to go into it and all of the other work. And these projects spend a lot of money before they actually make their final investment decision. I think, I'm not sure, but I think Gorgon spent $1.5 billion before they actually got to FID. So a hell of a lot of work goes in, and they are capable of negotiating on these very matters that we put in the bill.
Simone.
Labor's come up with a possible solution, and there's a difficulty agreeing to what the other side says. I think the frustration is nowhere more apparent, for instance, than in the area of apprentices. So if you look at, probably apprentices and also graduate engineers as well. So we met with Chevron 18 months ago over, the number of industrial agreements that were going to happen in that contract. And during the course of those discussions, when they were explaining how the upshore and upstream and downstream contracts would work and the extent of the work and how many different employers would be involved, they told us that they had no policy for any of their subcontractors on the employment of apprentices or any sort of training policy, so graduate positions with any of their subcontractors. So KJV, for example, has no requirement in terms of employing or training anyone as part of their contract with Chevron. So the frustration is that today, despite the number of resource projects going on, despite the hundreds of millions of dollars that are being invested in those resource developments, we're actually at record low number of apprentices. And I think that's really resonated with the West Australian community. I think they can experience that every day. I'm also on the State Training Board, and there's a real frustration there that there's actually not that many opportunities around to try and, that many levers that we've got available to us to try and inject more apprentices into the system, for instance. So if the current arrangement is sufficient and all that needs to happen is that there needs to be a better, what some people call a dating service between the large-scale proponents and local manufacturers, then why is it that there's no requirement on any of those resource companies to directly train people, for instance? It's just one example, I think, of the frustration that people have over the current system, and one of the benefits that could come out of a more structured arrangement that's in the proposed legislation. I think the other element of that problem with apprentices, and I imagine there's a lot of people in this room who have experienced, is that people came up as apprentices, as trainees through workshops. So if the workshops are starting to suffer, then in fact there's going to be no nursery, if you like, or no environment for people to do their time, their 3 or 4 years apprenticeship, and then come up with some experience and then go into those jobs. So it's not only that people are frustrated that the number of people that are going to be imported fly in, fly out. It's not so much interstate, but it's from overseas, 457s and fly in, fly out. It's that people intuitively know that the current system, there's nothing inherent in the current system that requires those companies to deliver for the future for this state, and that's what's frustrating for people.
No, interesting comments, Simone. I'll take them on board. My observation of a number of the agreements and negotiations, which I haven't actually been privy to, obviously, but historically, is that the major resource companies in particular take a great deal of pride in the number of apprentices that they retain in their own workforces, and they're always quoting figures at us. It is true, though, in my observation, and that's all I can go on, that the cycle of positive
economic circumstances and less positive circumstances in the industry is directly reflected in the taking on and the retention of apprentices. And I'm referring just to particularly the steel fabrication area. And yeah, everyone is concerned to make sure that we've got a skilled workforce for the future. That's one of the barometers of success. And that's why, and I'm sure that will be one of the indicators of success that this government will be judged by as we go forward with what we're doing in this area. The fact of the matter is we have had a GFC, we have had a whole lot of projects put on hold, colossal projects put on hold, and they are taking a while to crank up, and people are observing the amount of work that has been sourced offshore and regretting that it hasn't come here. But you know, the points you make are valid.
There's no doubt that the resources boom is going to change Western Australia fundamentally, and what we're talking about today is what type of Western Australia is going to emerge from this resources boom. The resources boom presents huge opportunities but also challenges. Value of the Australian dollar makes life difficult. Shortages of skilled labour, shortages of labour generally makes life difficult. So for other sectors of industry. So are we going to build on the opportunities, or are we going to let other sectors succumb as a result of the challenges? What type of Western Australia are we going to get out of this resources boom? So it's an issue for the industry, it's an issue for the unions and professional associations, but I think it's a broader issue, isn't it? It's about the type of Western Australia, what sort of economy, what sort of society we're going to end up with as a legacy from a huge boom.
In there that, and purely from the steel point of view, is that in order to bid on specific government contracts, you had to have X number of apprentices in your workshop. That seems to have disappeared somewhere along the line. That was a good thing, because it did mean that people who were employing apprentices were getting, shall we say, a better crack at the contract. I don't believe that your bill goes far enough, because basically it's still hairy-fairy and relies on the individual ministers to make a valued judgment. I believe that you currently have legislation in place which would enable someone with the, can I be so bold to say, balls, to actually make it work. You have got those agreements in place, and it's very easy for you to put something forward, and this is what everyone wants to see. What are you going to do about it rather than just talk about it? You know, you need to do something, because everyone here is here because they're basically suffering and they can see it going downhill quick. Apprentices aren't being trained. We took something like 30 years to get a course through TAFE for draftsmen specific to our needs. 2 years ago we managed to get one through. It's been discontinued simply because people aren't taking any more on, because we don't have the work to sustain them. You know, they offer subsidies for this, that and the other. Most people don't want subsidies. If they've got the work flowing through, they can support their own apprentices, and that's what I think we all want. We just want something done within the existing framework. If you won't support Eric Ripper's program, which, like I say, I don't think it goes far enough, quite frankly, but I saw certainly nothing that was wrong with it other than, you know, political posturing. And I've actually become quite friendly with a number of politicians in my area, with Phil Edmund and so forth. We've seen him in his office, and certain things are starting to happen. But fundamentally, it requires action on the government's part, not work. You have got the legislation in place, use it.
Emilio, you're right. There are all sorts of levers at the government's disposal, and I want to see them levered energetically, and that's why I'm talking about a re-emphasis on that point and a greater accountability in how we go about it. And, you know, I don't bring any baggage
to the role to do that. I'll be judged on what I achieve in the time ahead. In terms of posturing, you know, again, I mean, I'm a member of the upper house. I'm not down in the assembly where they have all these debates. Nobody ever takes any notice of what goes on up there. We actually generally do, because it all runs so smoothly, Eric. But when I'm managing bills, I do take on board proper suggestions for how we can make them better. That's the actual record, and that's the only thing I can go to stand by. This is not posturing. It'd be easy for me to say, oh yeah, let's go along with this, and everyone go, oh good on you, Simon. No, I'm not going to do that, because I think the bill is flawed. We're already doing all the stuff about each project, from $100 million above in particular focused on. Each is seen as, what did you call it, a boutique, but as a standalone project that government actually engages with. That's how it was in the past as well, but I think we need to reinvigorate that, make it more transparent so everyone knows what's actually happening. And that's what we're going to do. And as I say, I'll be judged on what we actually achieve, not by what I'm just saying here today. You're right, Phil Edmund is one amongst a number of members that are good local advocates, and Peter Tinley is here. You know, Peter speaks up for his electorate as well. Yeah, how's that for bipartisanship and not posturing? You know,
we had to drag them to it.
Well, the point is you had to engage with them, and now I'm going to damn well make sure that all resource proponents, both before and after the fact, are engaged with in Western Australia to deliver the outcomes that we need, whether they like it or not. The problem with the bill is I don't want us to just have to be forced to get an agreement up front wherein a commitment is made to a minimum level of local content. That's a recipe for failure. And then when you say, when you put over their heads, you will pay so many $1 million penalty if this isn't achieved. I don't know how you measure it 10 years down the track and you go to court and everything. I don't think that helps us one little bit. But what I do know is that once we agree on some minimum level of local content, regardless of what it is, as soon as that is achieved, that resource company, that investor, is then going to be entitled to say, right, that's it, and government will have no further levers on them in the future. And I don't think that's the sort of thing that we should bequeath to our community once we've retired, as you say, David, 10, 20, 30 years down the track. That's my reason.
Well, Simon, at one level you complain that there'll be some penalty if they don't abide by the provisions, and then you say you don't want a situation where the government has no further levers over them. Look, let me just read out the section of the bill that relates to enforcement. This is what is to be negotiated in each case. The amount or method of assessing the amount of money payable to the state or other persons in the event of a breach of a provision of the agreement. So, you know, hundreds of millions of dollars is your idea of what might be negotiated, but it would be something that would be negotiated in regard to each agreement. Look, we've already got legislative provisions for local content. It's just they're not detailed enough, they're not tough enough, and they're not open enough. So, you know, I don't see any particular problem with what's been proposed here. Have a look at the provisions of the bill. They're moderate, they're modest, but they do a lot better than what we got in our existing framework. Now, Simon, usually when the government introduces a bill, the public service gives a briefing to the opposition. I'd be very happy to offer government officers a briefing on the full contents of our bill, and I make that offer to you publicly now. I'll arrange for opposition staffers and other interested people who've helped us with the bill to provide a briefing to the government and the public service, and we can go through all of these details so that there are no misconceptions about what we're actually proposing.
Yep, delighted to accept.
Look, I'd like to take more questions, but it's ticked past 2 o'clock and I'm conscious our speakers have to get away. So thank you, Minister. Thank you, Eric. Thanks for your time today and for the conversation. Thank you all for attending today. It's great to have a full house. Keep an eye out for the West TV special on the forum. It should be available in the next week or two. So thanks for coming. I hope you enjoyed the conversation.